So today I'm joined by Jacob Ranson, sports reporter at Orient, which covers several titles across London, including most locally Watford Recorder and Dagenham Post, who report on Dagenham Rugby games, along with Leyton Orient as well. Does Jacob report on? So we're going to talk about that today. How Dagenham can be an established League One club. How can they become that League One club that they were, albeit for only one season? And how can they can stay there and be a mainstay in the Football League, as Leyton Orient were for quite a long time? And how can we break out of this smaller club mentality with these new American owners? I say new, it's a few years now, but we get in the grand scheme of things.
I begin by asking him what it's like to be a sports reporter during the pandemic.
So we'll start with the biggest news at the moment, and the return of fans to stadiums. I know you cover a lot of football locally and have done throughout lockdown this year. You've been to lots of empty stadiums, which is quite weird. So how crucial is it that we've got fans back, both supporters and clubs themselves?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, like you said, I've been very lucky and extremely grateful that I've been able to go to plenty of games still. But it's not quite the same. It's very eerie. You really miss that atmosphere, and when you go to some games and there's a big win, you don't always feel like it's a big win, because it's sort of a fist bump and a cheer between the team, and then wander off rather than the standard celebrations. So it's a massive boost, obviously, providing it's not the tier system that lets sort of local area down, but massive boost, and a massive boost for the clubs, obviously, just to get some fans back in, and the players themselves. It gives them that extra bit of motivation, I'm sure.
I certainly can't wait to get back to the Civ where I watch at Victoria Road. And I'm sure many of the fans watching this as well can't wait to get back to Victoria Road, as predominantly the audience here will be Dagenham supporters. I'd like to talk about how they're doing so far this season. So I know you've probably been to not as many Dagenham games as Orient games this season. So I'd start with how I think we've gone as a supporter myself. My view is that it has been a poor start and injuries have played a part, but the performances haven't been up to scratch. We'll get on to predictions in a second, but I do believe that the likes of McCallum, who, to be fair to him, has been injured himself, and the others need to step up to the plate and be on top form to reach expectations, because you do need that bit of luck and players to be on form to get to where we want to be this season. So the expectation of playoffs is one that the club upholds, as well as myself. I do write about how I feel McMahon should be getting more out of the players, and I hold that view, but also take into account the aforementioned injuries that may again hinder our chances this season. However, we do seem to have turned a corner in recent weeks, turning out some positive results. I'll say that with great caution. So I hope that will continue. I know you've been to a game or two this season at Victoria Road, at least a game or two than many of us. So what do you make of what you've seen of the season so far?
Yeah, I think I totally agree with what you said. It's definitely been a disappointing start to the season, especially when you think of the player recruitment, the big names, the perhaps well-known sort of budget they're sort of using this season in the bid for sort of getting in the playoffs or even getting promoted. Obviously, injuries have played a massive part. There's no denying that. When you've got sort of Paul McCallum, who's an out goal scorer, missing, you're going to sort of lack that. But even when perhaps he was in the team for the first few games, he might have had a little knock then, but weren't really getting the service for a sort of target man that loves to score a header, I'd say. So that's been disappointing. And as you said as well, perhaps McMahon needs to get a bit more out of that squad, as this is not just the 11 that are sort of big name players. There's quite a bit of squad depth. Obviously, again, injuries have played a part, but there's plenty of players, and then some other players that perhaps haven't got the minutes that I would have expected them to get. I mean, I've watched a lot of George Saunders over Hornchurch. I think he's a fantastic talent, very raw, don't get me wrong, and needs to improve on certain areas, but he's a player I'd like to see a bit more of, and feel him running down the wing could provide a lot to George Saunders. But as we know, Darryl McMahon likes to play with wing backs, and I'm not sure that quite suits George himself. But that's something to keep an eye on as well.
I suppose it is hard with we've got such squad depth, but it's just finding that where you can fit them in. But if we want to be up there at the end of the season, we haven't really got much time for experiments, really. So with the
No.
likes of George Saunders, I know McMahon did say about it'll take time for him to get to his best, but if he's not getting the game time, that is a problem, and that's on McMahon as well. We've mentioned about the how we've done so far this season. So now we'll move on to predictions. And I put a poll up on Twitter yesterday, actually, and I've got the results here. And the voice, or at least a sample of it, of the fan base is rather mixed. So you can see the options were champions, which I thought was quite optimistic, but it was either that or relegation. I didn't want to put that on there. So, and then there's playoffs, top half and bottom half. So the results were as follows: the champions 2%, very very optimistic. The playoffs were I selected with the 19% of other people, so 20% altogether. Top half 46%, bottom half 32%. So some may say I haven't experienced enough disappointment as a Dagger yet, but there we are. That's everyone else's opinion. Where do you think we'll finish?
I think if they don't finish in the playoffs, it will be a disappointing season, really, when you think of the money spent, the players brought in, perhaps the owner's expectation, and perhaps the stature of Dagenham as a sort of top non-league outfit. That should be the expectation, but it's been a slow start, and they're a long way off that at the moment. But I would say there's no teams that have been real standouts so far in the National League, other than perhaps a couple. And consistency could see you into the playoffs. And as we know, you only have to finish high in top half, to get in the playoffs. So that's got to be the aim. And if they don't achieve that, it won't be a successful season. But as I said, it's going to be a tough ask after the slow start. But hopefully, with everyone sort of coming back to fitness and a bit of a break actually at the moment, and the good FA Cup sort of result will push them on and push them in the right direction.
Yeah, it is that consistency, and with getting the right selection of team, which in recent seasons Dagenham just haven't been able to have, and some blame the medical team for that, but we'll have to see. So it's about Orient as well, this video, and the comparison between the two clubs. Very big rivalry there. I'll let you sort of take over on Orient so far this season, as obviously you're a lot more engaged in following them, a lot more than I am. Because I know you've been to a fair few games yourself. How have they been doing that in their second consecutive season in League Two?
Yeah, I've been sort of lucky to go to most Orient home games so far. The second season, I would say it's a bit mixed, but overall been very good. You know, sitting 8th in the table now after sort of a couple of wins at home this week, and just 1 point off the playoffs is a lot better than perhaps most would have expected, with a squad that hasn't really been altered since last season. I'd say the big difference perhaps is obviously going up from the National League and perhaps not having the momentum that most teams normally would, because of obviously the sad passing of Justin Edinburgh sort of zapped that, and obviously you went into the season on a bit of a downer rather than that sort of up, and everyone knew last season would perhaps be tough, rather than you look at a lot of clubs, they come up at the level and they all of a sudden do extremely well, perhaps against the odds, because of that confidence and momentum. This season, it seems like Ross has sort of really settled into the job now. And tough job to go into as well. I know he was Justin's assistant, but big shoes to fill. Doing very well. It seems they're starting to find the system and lineup they want to go with. But as we all know, at all levels of football, it's hard to keep a consistent side with the amount of games sort of in this congested fixture list this season, and due to the circumstances and the long layoff that's perhaps created more injuries, where players have come back after 6 months away from playing. But overall, it's been a very good start to the season, I'd say, and some impressive home form as well, which wasn't the case last season. So
I just want to put that into context, really. What is the expectation of Orient this season amongst the fans and the club itself?
I think a lot of realistic fans would have settled for mid-table rather than a bottom half finish again. most fans though would be expecting to push for a playoff position. And I know the director of football, Martin Ling, has sort of said that the way we're sort of going and the team, he expects sort of playoffs now. So I think the aim has sort of changed perhaps from the first match to now. And I suppose they've got a real togetherness that perhaps they might not have even had at the start of the season. They've gone through a lot. They had the coronavirus sort of outbreak where they had 2 weeks off and sort of lost out on the chance of playing Tottenham in the cup, which was gutting, and had a bit of a bad run of form, but they've sort of come through that now and sort of come out the other side after originally a pretty strong start.
So those expectations would then be considered some realistic and some quite high, because it is actually their 114th season in the Football League. But with their setbacks in recent years, with the financial situation as well, and with the Dagenham having their own troubles, both now on an upwards trajectory, the question I'd like to discuss is, can the Daggers close the gap on the O's as both sides enter a new era? One factor, we won't be able to cover everything today, but one factor that we have already mentioned is that of the mentality of the clubs, with Orient's second oldest league club in London, I believe, and their history is huge. Whereas Dagenham itself dates back to 1992, of course, with that, prior to the merger, but there was a relatively small club mentality with a small history. I believe the Daggers can break out of that, the clear ambition of the owners. Of when I spoke to Peter Freund, he wanted to be an established League One side as the ultimate goal. But I just wondered your thoughts on that from an Orient perspective. Do you think that's doable? How long are you thinking to get to League One for Dagenham?
I mean, there's a lot of similarities in the ownership actually, because obviously Orient have got some sort of American owners as well. And they've probably got similar targets. They set out sort of 5-year plans perhaps to get up to League One. Obviously Orient have been an established sort of side in League One and will know the experience of it. Obviously Dagenham had that one sort of year up there, and it was tremendous to see them sort of fly up against all odds up the leagues. But I'd say there's a gap, but there is obviously a big gap. But Dagenham could close it down, providing Orient don't sort of keep flying up as well, I suppose. But the big difference, I'd say, perhaps, is just the history. Obviously, is a big part. You know, Orient have got probably a bit more of a bigger fan base and a bit more of a well-known club, but that sort of doesn't always mean everything. Now you see a lot of clubs sort of come up the levels out of nowhere, and perhaps Dagenham need to look at it as a bit of a fresh start under the Americans, and there's no doubt in my mind they could be a League Two club, maybe not this year, but the year after, or at least very soon. And I do think that people don't quite realise how tough it is, though, going up the leagues at the same time. I think Orient found out, it's very different League Two from perhaps when they were even in it before getting down to the National League, and the levels sort of rose at all leagues, sorry, like the National League, I'd say is not really what I remember it as when I was young. Most of the clubs are now full-time, and most of them have some extremely talented and very good players. They're not the typical non-league lump it forward players like when I was really little. I suppose with the ambition around Dagenham, though, there's no reason why they can't sort of get back up to the Football League and sort of compete with Orient. I mean, personally, it would be great to see that derby match back, and obviously being a local to the clubs, it would be great to see them both in League One playing against each other. But as I say, it's a tough ask, and I think Dagenham have probably slightly found that out since the takeover, that it's not as easy as sort of coming in and setting that bar high and then going on to achieve it. As we know, sort of last season probably didn't go to plan in the end, and this season's not gone to plan so far, but they got a hope for playoffs and push on. And I think the big one for me is building up the fan base at Dagenham as well. We all know that it's got a real hardcore support, but it's sort of always been that 1,500, and and you need that to sort of build up before you can push up too high. Otherwise, you're sort of financially restricting yourself at the same time, which is not what you want from your club.
I think the owners did mention that, and I think their main goal, and they believe that as soon as we get to League Two, it's not going to happen like straight away, but that's the big barrier, getting to League Two, the Football League. Also, not just with the support and fan base, but also with players. I thought I'd get a tweet up as well from you, which is another thing I'd like to touch on, and it's to do with the lure of the Football League for players, which I think makes it difficult for any club to get out of the National League nowadays, because with the money involved, and just people want to play not non-league football, but league football. And it's this tweet which mentions Gordon, Ling and Wilkinson having a chat on the pitch at Orient before the game. That was a big loss, Gordon. That's the issue, isn't it, really?
Yeah, I mean, as a young, hungry player like Liam Gordon is, you want to play at the highest level possible. And I mean, probably him, much like myself, will think of Bolton as that club that played in the Europa League. And it's not just a League Two club, it's a League Two club that's full of history. And that pull was probably too much. And probably he warrants that move. I thought he was absolutely fantastic for Dagenham. And even when he first sort of appeared, I mean, I actually was lucky enough to see him when he was on loan at Hendon. I think Joe White was there at the time as well. Yeah. And you could tell then he was something a bit special, especially going forward, which is, I think, the way that fullbacks play now. It's more about the way they go forward than back. Sometimes not to be agreed with, but that's what people want out of him now. And he's an exceptional talent. And he come on it for Bolton against Orient, and although they were sort of trailing heavily, he looked bright in that game as well. And I think he's got a very, very good future. But going back to your point, it's very hard to keep them sort of young, hungry, motivated players at your National League side when there's a lot of interest. And obviously another one from my tweet, Connor Wilkinson was sort of phenomenal for Dagenham when he come in. And to be honest, he's been, perhaps not last season, he didn't sort of quite settle in at Orient, but this season he's been brilliant for Orient. And you could go as far as saying he could be one of the best sort of forwards in League Two, albeit playing a bit more of a right wing sort of role in a front three. But obviously when he come in, there was always that clause that he could go if a Football League club come in, and that's because he's a determined lad that wants to play at the highest level. And I'm sure he'll not be happy to settle Orient if they stay in League Two for too long. He'll want to keep pushing on, and much like Liam Gordon, I suppose he'll want to keep pushing on. And obviously not including my tweet, but Manny, I think, was a real big loss for Dagenham. And as you've seen, he's gone on to captain Scunthorpe even in a game, and
crazy,
and scored on the weekend. And I think perhaps another one, a bit like Liam Gordon, a bit of an untapped potential, that obviously brilliant for Dagenham, but probably had more to offer even. And probably they both didn't get the chances at first, and then made them fan favourites very quickly because of their efforts. But going back to your original question, I suppose I've rambled on. It's very tough to keep players like that. I think it's easier when you're a National League side to sign players that have been around and perhaps more worried about ensuring their sort of careers kind of be carried on. And
they're the ones that just don't take you to that next level, are they? They just consolidate you in the National League.
I mean, I've always found, when I've followed obviously a lot of non-league football, you always find the teams that find these gems per se are the ones that go on, these young gems, because it's not only, I suppose, the opposite side of you're going to lose some of these players is the fact if you tie them down to deals, you're going to get some money back, and it's a business, isn't it, at the end of the day? But also they're the ones that are hungry to get to that level, whereas perhaps some of your more experienced players are just happy to settle in and do their job. And I've always found that some of the clubs that have sort of spent big and brought in the maybe older, wiser heads, albeit you do need a couple of them, have never been the ones to go on and get promoted. It's more the ones that have found the gems. And that's why originally, when the first out of Dagenham signing I was made aware of before it was announced that George Saunders had signed, I thought, well, this is the way to go. You know, these players are what can sort of perhaps make you go a bit under the radar, but then do extremely well. Obviously, then you sort of announce Paul McCallum, and it's a bit of an expectation, perhaps. So a mix of signings, I'd say, for Dagenham, which isn't the worst way of going. But I do personally like the young gem route, as you see from a lot of lower down in non-league. That's sort of what carries you up the levels.
And that did impress a lot of the fan base. They likened it to John Steele's recruitment, going back and just getting the younger players from lower down divisions, and not just getting players that have already been proven but past their peak. So you mentioned Manny there as well, and Wilkinson. I let out aside because I think a lot of fans think, where would we be if we had them now? Like, I would probably say we would have had a lot better past couple of seasons if they had stayed on and played out the remainder of the season before leaving. Do you think that, you mentioned this is the hardest league you think perhaps to get out of, or all the leagues are hard, but do you think this is the hardest league, getting from National League to League Two, or is it League Two to League One?
I would say National League to League Two, because first of all, you've got to look at it. There's only one automatic, and then so and then you've got the playoffs. So it's harder just from that point of view. You know, you've got more promotion places in League Two to League One. And I did briefly touch on it. We've seen it plenty of times. Clubs will come up from the National League and ride that wave of confidence and end up in League One. It happens sort of countless times. Obviously, Orient weren't lucky enough to have that sort of bounce. But I would say it's so much harder to get out of the National League, as we've sort of seen. I mean, Orient sticking local, thought they could bounce straight back up, proved to be very hard. And they were still, I think, very, very successful to go up in the second year. Look at the likes of Wrexham, Chesterfield, even Notts County more recently. They all come down and perhaps expect to go straight back up, but realise it's not that easy. And there's a lot of really strong sides in the National League that people would think that perhaps looking from afar would think, oh, we'll go there and win. Like, you know, there's a lot of clubs like your Sutton Uniteds and that who are been in the league for quite a while now, and they're always a tough side. You know, and I think people don't really realise that. I mean, personally, until I sort of worked in sort of football and sport, I would have never thought the National League was as hard as it is. So it's something that people aren't really prepared for. And like I say, once you've got that momentum on your side, it can perhaps carry you through. I mean, you do see there's a gulf between the National League and League Two, but perhaps not as big as it once was. So it's just maybe perhaps the bit quicker decision making and whatnot, which is why, going back to my point just a minute ago, I do like the young sort of gem approach, because they're quicker to adapt to that and perhaps have that extra stride of pace or hunger to learn and be that step quicker. So it helps when you go up the levels as well.
It's looking at it from a bit of a different perspective, but my Football Manager season certainly seen that only one automatic promotion place makes it very, very difficult. And with the expectation with this season with Dagenham, with Steve Thompson saying at the fans forum, it would be disappointed if we weren't there or thereabouts. So I think the pressure really is on McMahon to succeed. But and I think, well, with getting these players to Football League standard players like Justin we've got, I think he's probably Football League standard. He's made a few mistakes this season, but the countless points he saved us in seasons gone by. I wonder whether when they have these contracts, whether they make the promise that they'll get to the Football League. And that's why time is quite of the essence. It's very important to get there as quick as possible to keep these players at the club. And just back to the original question of, do you think the Daggers will close the gap on Orient? Do you think they will do it, and when?
So just going on the point about Justin, I think he's an incredible goalkeeper for National League level, and personally think Dagenham are very lucky to actually still have him, to be honest. I know he had interest the other year and they tied him down to a pretty lengthy deal for someone at that level. And like I said, though, he's probably one that's a bit older and and probably wouldn't mind playing in the Football League. So the pressure's probably on, and perhaps maybe with that added pressure is why some of the players make a few more mistakes, knowing that they've got that bit more on them to succeed this season, as opposed to perhaps whether they were at Dagenham last year or whether they were at another club. If Dagenham are to close the gap, when would it be? I think it's going to sound a bit cliche, but it's one of them things you need like a 5-year plan in place. I think because of the obviously the history and perhaps the amount of fan base. I think Dagenham have, like I said, have got a real hardcore fan base, but the amount is probably not as high as Orient's, and that's a big factor and difference, I suppose, when you're playing these. I remember going back to obviously the aim of both teams wanting to probably be League One, when Orient were playing like the likes of Leeds and stuff in League One, and they've got 35,000 at their home games. There's that bit more, isn't there, when you go up the levels, and for Dagenham to be able to use their home ground as an advantage, you're going to have to bump the crowds up. Obviously, I think Dagenham's squad this year is very strong, but there is some players that have been in the National League for a long time and perhaps maybe couldn't cut it in League Two. So it'd probably be, they'd have to alter the squad slightly. So I'd say that the 5-year plan, perhaps from either when they come in, they might have set one, or now they should be looking to strive off that. And I actually know that I think Peter and Craig spoke to Orient's Kent Teague quite a bit when they were taking over. So I mean, I think that weirdly it's going to, obviously there's that rivalry, and probably a lot of Dagenham fans won't like me saying, but I feel like they'll follow that sort of model that Orient have instilled with, getting things sponsored and just improving the club slowly. I think Orient went back to basics actually when they went down to National League. And Orient fans probably won't like that comment, but they went back to basics and thought, how do we rebuild this club and make sure we're financially sound? How do we improve sponsorship? How do we grow this club and move up the levels? And I think they've really done that with their marketing, and that's something I think Dagenham will look to do as well on their way to going up. I mean, the shirts with Harry Kane sponsorship are a bit ingenious by Orient, and I think Dagenham are sort of following a bit of that model. I think it sounds stupid, but even things like the clubhouse, the shop, it makes you feel like a more professional outfit per se, and those things will perhaps bring more fans, or but at the end of the day, I suppose it's success that brings more people in the gate, and if Dagenham can get up to League Two, I'm sure the crowd will grow, and then if they could go up to League One, it would grow even further, like anything. But I'd say a 5-year plan if they wanted to sort of come up against Orient and be the bigger club, even, I suppose.
I did speak to Peter Freund in 2019. I asked him, where do you want to be in 5 years? And he said League One. So I think we're quite behind the curve on that, perhaps. So we need to get a quick promotion if possible.
I think he would have said that originally with the fact of perhaps going up last season or this season. So they could go up this season. I suppose you could be back on track, but we'll see.
So with closing the gap, where do you think Orient what is the limit for Orient really in terms, is it League One? Is the limit there how far they can reach really, realistically?
Yeah, I would say when Orient were sort of for a few couple years at least, they were sort of top end League One side, and that was probably pushing a bit above their weight really. And there was almost that moment when they ended up in the Championship. So I would say they're a League One side really from history and stature, and I think most people would agree with me on that. But could they go any higher? I suppose depends. Again, it's fan base, isn't it? You look now at Championship clubs and they've all got these huge stadiums that get loads of fans, and as you've seen from sort of Wycombe Wanderers, it's hard to cut it at that level. So unless there's plans in place to really sort of grow the fan base and even potentially make the ground bigger, which is a bit hard with all the flats. I can't really see much higher than League One for one, that reason, and two, financially. I think for perhaps Orient and Dagenham, that's sort of the push where you start to look at, is this financially possible if you go too much higher?
Yeah. You talked about finances. I'd just like to bring it back a bit. And I've always thought with the National League, there are teams that really go for it one season in one transfer window, expecting to get promoted with the money that comes from that. And if they don't, they end up falling back. And it's like one step forward, two steps back sort of thing. I think that's a big issue as well.
Yeah, I think that's a big issue at a lot lower levels than National League as well. It seems to be that perhaps you're on a bit of a run towards the end of the season and you think, right, we can go for it next year, and they sort of pump all this money in without really being able to warrant it, and then all of a sudden you've got to make cutbacks to make up for that, and as you say, you're taking two steps back. There's a lot of clubs that have done it the gradual way, and I think that is the better way, because you don't want to cripple yourself, and you don't want to end up in a situation. I mean, Orient and Dagenham have been in the situation where they've had to sort of get rid of players because of financial situation, and end up in a bad way, and as a fan, that's never nice to see, and you sort of lose hope of winning games and everything else that comes with it. I would say it happens probably a bit too much in the National League, though, because, as we touched on, there's only that one automatic spot. So it's quite ambitious to sort of back yourself to be that one in itself anyway. I'm sure a lot of teams do, but it's not a bad thing. But it's to spend a lot of money above your means is not good either, because I'm sure most fans would take a team in existence than a team sort of falling down the leagues because of crippling themselves financially.
And Dagenham, we experienced that with the save the Daggers just a few years back. That wasn't to do with how we were pushing, but to get promoted. But it just shows you how precious it is just to have a football club really to support in the end. I know Orient have had similar problems previously.
Yeah, I mean, the like I touched on that sort of season at Dagenham, I actually thought they were going to go on and do something quite special. They had some real good players. I mean, I've sort of loved watching sort of Fajiri Okunabire for one, Corey Whiteley another, and John Still, a good manager at the helm. You sort of were thinking this could be a good season, and obviously everything unravelled as it did, and then you sort of, like you say, you're happy you've got a club to support, but thankfully, I think the West Ham charity game where the fans rallied in big numbers and things like that show that it's a special club and has a good following, and I'm sure, no doubt, that once fans can come in, hopefully in the next couple of weeks, they'll be in the numbers, and obviously, albeit probably socially distanced and following the rules, but they'll be there and happy to be back watching their team. And yeah, I suppose financially, you don't ever want to see that really, because it's like I think I said before, it's better to have a team to support than not really. So yeah, it's an interesting one. It's a hard thing to balance, I'd say, because as everyone says, you have got to spend to get promoted, and that sort of goes without saying. It's a rarity when you're not spending that you get promoted. And that's the price you pay, but it can be a very costly one at the same time. Obviously Dagenham's wasn't sort of because of that, but ended up being a costly sort of thing, because you think it probably set Dagenham back a good couple seasons at least, because obviously you had to rebuild the whole squad with perhaps players that were sort of gambles and weren't maybe good enough or ready to play at National League level. Some perhaps might be now, but on a very tight budget, and it was always, I thought it was very sad to see Dagenham at the bottom of the National League, because we all know they're a lot bigger club than that.
It was, it would have set it back even further. We could have easily got relegated in that season. So I think that's quite impressive that we didn't at that point. You mentioned Fajiri Okunabiri as well, another ex-Dagger that's gone on to the Football League. If we made an ex-Daggers 11, I'm sure there'd be high flying perhaps in League 2 or League 1.
Yeah, most definitely. We could just name a few in Fajiri Okunbire, Morgan Ferrier, Connor Wilkinson, Liam Gordon, Manny Honorise. There's plenty out there, and I always think when I'm looking around the scores, I think there's plenty of old ex-Dagenham, ex-Orient players in and around sort of Championship, League One, League Two, and you think, well, imagine they were all playing for that team now. They'd be an incredible side, but I suppose that's wishful thinking, isn't it? To expect that you can keep everyone that's ever any decent.
Thanks for watching. Make sure you like and subscribe for more videos.